Hammers with Troy Wood. I was at his place a couple weeks ago, and we're going to be doing a clinic in Wyoming, in Casper, for the Wyoming Professional Farriers Association. And there's a mail-in shoe contest where you can mail in a shoe before January 24th of 2025, and you can have the opportunity to win this hammer in the open class. Just go to their Facebook page, Wyoming Professional Farriers Association, and it has all the details on how you can get entered to win this hammer. But this is the start, where Troy took a piece of S7, and it was about 2.5 pounds to start weighing, and I believe it's 2.5 inch round. Now he's making it into a billet, basically a rectangular billet, so then he can go to the press here in a sec, where he's going to mark the eye and then punch the eye. And that's where the handle's going to go through the hammer. So hope you guys enjoy this process. Troy making a hammer. Here's where Troy is marking for the eye and actually going to punch out the eye with this hydraulic press. Like a little tool loop, cool the tool before it goes down into the hot steel. This is an important part of the process in the sense of you need to be pretty precise with where this drift is going to be going through. So that way it has a clean eye and it's in the center, so it's not either off to one side or the other, so that the faces aren't weak, and then your offset of your hammer is going to be in the center. So it's a time where he's got to take his time and make sure that that drip goes right down in the center, and there was a slug that dropped out. So here now Troy is going to be starting to mark off the fullering, or the troughs as he also calls them. And this is going to start to establish the faces and how big the faces are. So there's a precise way of measuring to make sure that they are proportionate and, not too close to the eye, but not too far away from the eye as well. So this is an important part in the sense of you need to hold your hand up straight and square, so that way when the press comes down, they're not cockeyed and crooked. When I made a hammer a couple years ago with Riley Kirkpatrick, this was the part where I struggled, and my hammer got a little bit of lopsided and wopsy-turny because I wasn't as precise with holding my hand and making sure that I was square up and down for where the press comes down and isolates the fuller in there. So here he's just trying to get that set up and make sure that it's even on both sides and doesn't turn out to be a lopsided hammer. So now he's just repeating the process on the other side with the fullering. And when making the hammer, it doesn't necessarily make a difference on which side is going to be your flat side and which side is going to be the round side. It's essentially going to come out in the grind, and the way that it's forged later on in the process, you'll see how the one side becomes round and the other side is forged flat. So you don't have to necessarily worry too much about making one side a round side and one side a flat side, unless you were making an offset hammer where it has more weight on the flat side of the hammer and less weight on the round side. In this hammer, it's just going to be a regular 2-pound turning hammer. So on this next step, Troy is actually sinking in a little mandrel so that he can have something to hold on to the hammer for the next step. So he's just got this mandrel, and it's going to open up the eye a little bit, and then he can go to the press here, and it's going to start to forge out the cheeks of the hammer. And this is just going to help get rid of some of the mass that's in the middle of it, and at the same time it's just going to open up the eye just a little bit more so that it'll be proportionate for a hammer. So this just gets rid of all the mass in the middle, and now he's going to slug it out with his hammer, and then he's going to flip it over in the fire and do the same to the other side. So here Troy is starting to actually forge out the faces just a little bit, And then he's going to fuller it down just a little bit more in the fullering. So he's just squeezing out a little bit on the face. Now he's going to come back in and establish the fullering a little bit more. And this is just where the hammer actually starts to grow and take shape and start looking like a hammer instead of like a little blob. So he's just forging them down, even on each side, so that way it's proportionate and not overdone on each side or the other. And then we'll go back to the power hammer here in a sec and two up the face just a little bit more. That's a pretty cool tool he's got there. It's like a little cradle, so that way he can set the mandrel into it, and that way it doesn't distort the bottom of the hammer at all when he's sinking it down in there on the power hammer. So now he's just going to forge out the faces or the cheeks just a little bit more, and just kind of grow it, forge it out. So this is probably my favorite step of the hammer making process, is kind of when the faces start to take shape. So he starts out by forging them into like a hexagon or an octagonal shape, and then now he can just go on the power hammer and control the hammer on how far it goes, and just watch his hands just rotate around as he starts to forge the faces into being round faces. Pretty cool and almost mesmerizing to watch, and just see the hammer control as it just rotates it around. And then you also have to have steady control with your foot, not to press down harder than you have been before, so that way you don't mash it down, because the foot controls the power in which the power hammer comes down. So this is where the faces of the hammer actually start to take shape. You can see he's got a little cup there on the bottom of the anvil, and now he's starting to forge the flat side of the hammer. So he's just trying to hit in any imperfections, just kind of forge it flat. So he's just rotating it around, so it's minorly altering the bottom side, which would be the round side of the hammer. But now he's just trying to forge that flat side into being flat. All the while doing this, you have to pay attention to the hammer control. When he had that in there, he didn't hit it down too hard because that would alter the eye and deform the eye. So trying to protect that as much as possible and not, create more work for yourself down the road. And just seeing like the hammer control, just barely tapping the hammer and just keeping it going round and round. Really cool to watch, and something to strive for when making tools. So here's the hammer. The next morning when it was cool, this is where it was finished, forged. So you can see there's not a lot of grinding that has to take place. We did mess up on the 2024 stamping and needed to be 2025, but we made that adjustment. So this is the tempering process. You use a mandrel to heat it up, and that gets the color. And then here's hammer on the handle, the finished product. So here's rules on how you could win this hammer with the mail-in shoe contest. Check out Wyoming Professional Farriers Association to figure out how you can get entered. We'll see you guys there.